Bum, bum, bum. Am I live? Am I live? Dismiss. Dismiss, dismiss, dismiss. All right, checking to see if I'm on. I can't tell. What the heck is going on? Am I? Oh, I am live? Am I live? Hold on a minute. No, wait a second. Wait a moment, for pity's sake. Okay. Ooh, I am live. All right. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Technical difficulties. I'm oh gosh. I gotta change these titles. No, I'm not doing that. Hold on a minute. Oh, brother. Everything's going. No, cancel. Okay. All right. What I'm trying to do is not workshop a better fighter. I'm answering a question on translating. Let me see if I can update this on the fly. Translating hexes into choices in a hex crawl adventure. This would be viewer mail time. Viewer mailbag. All right, let's see if that. Okay. Excellent connection. All right, so let's. Hello, Mercurius. Yes, I'm. I was trying to do this vertically. So this was an experiment, in a sense, of me trying to do a vertical stream through OBS as opposed to my phone, just because I can manage things a bit better. But something seems to have gone a bit wrong. So I don't know if you're getting this. I don't know if this is meant to be kind of coming up in the vertical feed. I've done this before, and it worked out. But I was using my phone. My phone's a bit clunky. Can't use my better microphone. I am sitting at my desk, so part of me was thinking, well, why do I just want to use my phone when I'm at my desk? But the reason why I'm doing it this way is because I'm not gonna be able to get a full hour in because I actually have something at noon, and then I have to help my daughter out. So yeah, maybe this is. I'll have to go back to using my phone to do the vertical. So yeah, this is a bit of an experiment. So apologies. My phone is Apple, but I'm actually doing it through OBS on my desktop. Long story short. So this is a bit of a test. This was a test run because I heard that you could. I heard that you could. I am full screen. All right, good. Because that was my intention. That was my intention. Because I found that I guess the short streams or the vertical streams are pretty good. And as I mentioned, I did them a few times and then I kind of put them away. And the reason why I thought the reason my use case for the vertical streams would be like if I was kind of in a bit of a rush, which I am. Today I'm in a little bit of a time crunch for now. I might be able to do a regular stream later on this afternoon. We'll see. But I'm in a little bit of a time crunch. So I thought instead of setting up a whole horizontal one, I would do something that seemed more casual. Hexed Press Casual Friday, right? But I'm glad it's all straightened out. I had to change the thing. What I wanted to do, and you can see here on the text, and kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to use OBS or a desktop application was so I could do things like easily throw text and things in the on the screen, which I can't really do. I shouldn't have gone that. I can't really do on my phone, so that you guys can see it. Right, I can't do that. So I thought, well, I'll try this, and then we'll see. So this was the comment was from. Now I gotta find the. I didn't put the name. I should have put the name the in the text. I didn't have a chance. I was moving too fast. From Hides His Eyes, which sent this about a week ago, and I'm just sitting on it because it was a really good comment, and I didn't want to kind of. I really like getting these really sort of, I guess, meaty comments, right? But sometimes I find that I don't want to answer it all in text, type out a whole long thing, whatever. So I thought, these are the things I like to, hey, let me do a video. If I have a bunch of these, I've done in the past, do a video on a few of them. This time I just had the one, but it's a pretty meaty one. And this way you can read it, but I'll give the full commentary. So they were responding to, I'm not sure how old this one was, but this is a Hexcrawling 101 stream that I done a while back on player maps and translating hexes into fiction. And their comments I'm kind of excerpt things a little bit. If the map is player facing, they just say, quote, we want to go here, and unquote, and point to a hex. If it's a GM facing map, right, then we have a problem since you ask them where they want to go, and if there's no obvious thing they're heading directly for, what's the most natural way they could answer with a cardinal direction? I've heard people answer this by saying, quote, you don't ask them which direction, you describe the lay of the land and ask which path they take from the available options. But that's a point map. So then what's the benefit of the hexes? But you're reminded that the hexes aren't abstraction is useful, so thanks. I'm still a little confused as I think, quote, sure, the square grid in a battle map is an abstraction too, but it matters to the rules which square you would be standing in if the squares were real. And surely it's the same with hex maps, but maybe in practice it's not such a big deal. And then he says, thanks for the excellent series. In any case, I want to finally have go at a proper hex crawl sandbox game, and this is all incredibly helpful. Okay, whew. So there's a few things to unpack here. So I think if you're the idea of the hex crawl, what's the benefit of the hex crawl over a point crawl is you have essentially 360 degrees of movement. And yes, you could say north, south, east, west. You could also say north, northeast, northeast, south, southwest, any kind of, right? You have any direction you can go to. It does not have to be a cardinal direction. It can be anything at all. You could also be pointing at a landmark. I want to go to that mountain over there and go. So you are not limited to your, and just like in I would think in a dungeon, you're not really limited to the squares. The squares kind of make it easy and you have a certain amount of room, but really the squares are just there to make kind of things make sense of an insensible world, or at least help us map and make sense of a world that is just easy for us, easier than trying to figure out exactly in some kind of other coordinate system where you are. So the idea of, hey, we want to go here and looking at on the player facing map, what are they looking at? So I guess really, if we were to kind of let's back up a minute. We're looking at a map, and I wish I had a map here in front of me. I have the Pendragon box set. I don't think it has. Does it have a map here? Hold on, it might. I think in the back of one of these, does it have a map? Ooh, it does. So if we're looking at, well, this one might not be a good one to look at. This one doesn't have hexes. So I guess it's not a good idea. I guess ultimately, the thing is when you're looking at a map, take the player-facing map option. You're looking at a map. There's generally going to be something there they're looking at. They're not just looking at some random hex on the map and saying we want to go there. There's something. It could be a location of, and I'm assuming that the player-facing map only has this info on it that they're kind of aware of, but I don't know. You do your game on if all the locations that are kind of available are basically known, you can do it that way. Let me take a sip of water here for the working man. Mercurius, you are in the wrong channel to say hexes are overrated. I think you should leave now. Get out! Brian says their flippant answer would be to give the group a dial or something and set their direction. They describe the travel as they go. Cool physical game component of dial could be fun. Yeah, you could totally do. With a compass, I mean dial, just give them sort of a compass, but it's one where they can set their direction. You totally could do that. Where you're traveling, you're picking a place to go, and it's not just a random point on the map. It could be a location. I know where the lost city of X is, or the caves of chaos, or we want to get to the town of Dale, and then you're going there. And that's no different regardless of the map you're using. One has a physical component that you're pointing to and saying, yes, we want to go to Dale, and Dale is here. Or, we want to go to Lonely Mountain, and Lonely Mountain is there. But you don't need the map to say that. And certainly, as players, you could create your own map and say, okay, we've been told where Lonely Mountain is. It's here. Or you could give them a starter map, which is, I think, not a bad thing to do, that has basically the big locations that you're going to know. In other words, if you're anywhere near Erebor, or in the region of Erebor, or is Erebor another name for Lonely Mountain, or that's the region in Lord of the Rings? In any case, wherever you are in that area, you're going to know Lonely Mountain. It's huge. So any map you have, anybody's going to know Lonely Mountain's over there. You might need more help to find smaller things. In any case, you are picking a point to go, and then you are trying to get there. Now, on a player-facing map, if the point is located on the map, then you kind of have an idea where to go. If we know where we are, we're starting, and we know where we're going. Okay, we're going southeast. That's easy. If we only know the name, then it becomes a little bit of an activity to figure out how to get there. And that can be a fun element in and of itself. Who are you contacting? Who's going to be your guide to get there? Who knows how to find the lost mine of Fandelver? Well, we got to go find it. We don't know where it is, but this person knows, so we got to go talk to them. Or we need to get a guide. We know someone. This is a trope that happens all the time in fiction, right? There's one person who knows how to get back there, one survivor of the last expedition to the Barrier Peaks, and they know how to get back, and their name is Blah Blue, so you're going to have to find Blah Blue and convince them or pay them or hire them, however, to help you find the place. And that's how you work. Uh-oh. Oh no. Ooh, my computer almost went to sleep. That would have been bad. Let me set that before I forget. Keep awake indefinitely. So the idea is you're not supposed to, well, not supposed to. The idea is for the GM facing ones that the players are doing other things other than finding it on the map and saying we want to go there to figure out how to get there. And it can be the way on a player facing map too, whereas they've gone and done all this legwork, and then that is when you declare the map, here's where it is. But the party is presumably going to have some aim. They're not just going to go, right? There's something, some adventure hook, some piece of lore you've laid out, something that they're interested in that's leading them there. So that's, I guess, the first part, if that makes any sense at all, is they should have a destination in mind when they're going out. If they don't, they could just try to go northwest. We just want to see what's west. Go west, young adventuring party. Well, they could do that. They could do that too. But with your hex map is you don't have to have all the paths defined. If you're on a point crawl, you kind of have to have all the points. Your web is preset. You have to figure that out. From here, they can go here, they can here. I'm sure there are ways to dynamically add paths on a point crawl. I'm not saying that is some kind of impossibility. But with the idea of the hex crawl is that you don't have to have any kind of preset paths or any sort of notion of you can get here to there. You can, assuming that you don't have any impassable regions, well, you can always get from here to there, but which hexes you go into are going to have costs associated with them. And to get to the second part of the question, the comment was that when you're looking at a square map, we have a good understanding of what it means to be in a certain square. If you're in one square, what are you adjacent to? Obviously, in combat, which is usually when we're paying attention to squares, that adjacency obviously is very meaningful. Do you have eyes on the subject? Do you have cover from the subject? Or is the subject right next to you? Where are you in relation to something else? That's what those squares are for. If you're just, and now with VTTs, it's gotten a little bit twisted where people will map out everything, but essentially it's how close or how adjacent are you to something else, whether it's a bomb going off or a trap or a monster showing up. That's kind of what you're using the squares for, right? You want to know in a dungeon situation, something's happened in square X. How close are you to square X? What is your adjacency to square X? That's kind of what you're using the squares for the most part. With hexes, it's a little bit different, but hexes do have meaning. I think the mistake is thinking, to go back to his question, you wouldn't, what does it mean to be in a certain hex? Well, it means a fair amount. If you go back and look and, what did I do with my BX books? Okay, they're not back here. If you go and you look at something, now this is going to be kind of dependent on what game you're playing. I'm going to assume for my answer, I'm just going to tell you about sort of BX, which is the same as OSE. If you're playing another game, they may have the similar system, or sometimes they'll do a more simplified one. Some games will have something like all they care about. I think I remember when I was looking at Twilight 2000 from Free League. I think they really just cared about whether you're sort of on road or kind of off road in the bush. They were not. I think 5e was like this too, where they didn't really care about whether that off road wilderness part was hills or forest or swamps. They they're like, you know what? It's just you're either on the road or you're in the bush, and that's all the kind of thing we care about. But if you're looking at BX or OSE, they have different terrain types, and AD&D is like this too. In a lot of older games, they'll have multiple different terrain types, and those terrain types are important. Your chances of encounters and your chances of getting lost vary somewhat, but to a pretty good degree, depending on what hex you're in. So if you're in a swamp hex, a wetlands type hex, then your chance of getting lost and any kind of encounters is, double that of being in a forest or grasslands hex. It might not be. It might be a third more than forest and double grasslands. So it makes a big difference. Not to mention what you'll encounter. The chances, remember in BX you have all these different tables about what you're encountering in which terrain. So which terrain you're in, which hex you decide to land on, is very important. A couple of weeks ago, or maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, I played in an outdoor survival game that Daniel from Bandits Keep ran, and it shows that relationship. It describes, or that relationship becomes, that mechanical relationship, right, becomes very clear. We weren't playing exactly by the book, but mostly by the book. He has kind of his own sort of game that he's sort of layering on top of it. But in any event, if you end your turn in the mountains, that is very much less ideal than if you can end your turn in the plains, because what you're encountering, those chances of encountering, are much greater. So if you can help it, you probably don't want to land and end in the mountains unless you have to. And sometimes you have to. If you can avoid being in the swamps, same thing. You would rather be, okay, if I got to end out in the wilderness, let me be in the grasslands, the plains. That's the best. And it usually goes on some kind of curve of like grasslands, forest, then some combination of sort of swamps or hills, depending on how you feel about them and which edition you're playing. Then depending on what you're doing, hills, swamps, desert, mountains, kind of the worst of the bunch. And then Badlands, I guess, is kind of in there as well. So what hex you're in does make a big difference. But remember, each hex is not wall to wall. It's, what is the most characteristic feature. So you have some wiggle room, but you want to make sure the players are aware of essentially where they are, because that's one of their meaningful choices. And this is one thing that a player-facing map does make more clear. If you're playing outdoor survival, you're playing with a player-facing map, you can look at that map and say, okay, over here is grasslands, over here is swamp, I'm going to stay on the grasslands. If you're playing on a player-facing map, you're going to want to give cues that even if you're not stepping, there's like there's no lines, there's no line that says you're stepping over into the wetlands hex, but you'll want to describe more about how the landscape is shifting, how things are getting moister, all the things, pick up some, get kind of a mood board maybe of different pictures of different wetlands, and you can talk about the ground getting spongier and the vegetation changing as things that kind of indicate, okay, we're moving out of these grasses and we're getting into the wetlands, and the party can go, whoa, this looks like we're going to swamps. We don't want to go to swamps. Let's head back. Or, okay, no, I know that where we're going is on the other side of the swamps. I think we're hitting the swamps, so we're just going to have to suck it up and go through the swamps. So the hex you're in has actually a lot of importance, but no one's going to force you to do that. The players aren't probably going to come to you and go, oh, excuse me, GM, I think we're in the swamps now, so you should use swamp encounters. So these are things that have as much meaning as you, the GM, put into them. So if you remember these mechanics and use them, they absolutely have meaning. But you're going to have to do that. So it is kind of a big deal which hex you're in. And certainly when you go back and look at the odds, if the odds of an encounter in the grasslands is 1 in 6, and the odds of an encounter in the swamps is 3 in 6, you're going from 16% to basically 50% encounters. So that is no small little minute change. It's not, it's 16 and the other one's 20. It's like, no, you're more than doubling your chances of running encounters. Same thing for getting lost. So these things absolutely have importance, and they're going to have as much importance as you put on them. Let's see, some stuff from Brian Smith here. Yes, you head west and the terrain moistens. Yes, it gets nice and moist. And then Brian Smith says it almost does seem like whether traveling by point or by loose direction depends on the quest. Yeah, there are a lot of things you can easily run a point crawl, and like I always say, is they're not these things we as people who talk about these things and play them often will put these different techniques in opposition. They're not in opposition. There is absolutely nothing wrong with having a point crawl and a hex crawl overlaid on each other. And in fact, hey Ian, and in fact, I would say that when you have river systems and road systems that the party's traveling on, those are essentially your point crawls that are absolutely overlaid on top of the hex crawl. Having the hexes is nice because sometimes the road, and I usually use, and I'm going to use it again. Look at Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. They could have taken the road all the way to from when they leave the Shire essentially, and they go to Bree. They could have taken the road from Bree all the way to Rivendell. It's pretty much a straight shot, I think, both ways. That's the easy way. Oh, take point crawl, but they don't do that. Why don't they do that? Because there are Nazgul on their trail, and the Nazgul are on the roads. So they have this incentive to get off the road, and then that forces them or incentivizes them to engage with hexcrawl as opposed to just going point to point on the point crawl part of the map. I think we don't often do that in our games. Give reasons for parties to go, you know what, we should probably not take the road. Another reason you might not want to take the road is if you think about it in olden days, I'm going to see if I can, well, I don't have a way of pulling up a map on here. I'll have to figure out some ways to, if I do this on OBS more, to get some more tools like I can do when I'm horizontal. But a lot of times the older roads, before the interstates, before the highways and things, a lot of the roads, especially if you're on the coast, they have coast roads. And that's always, and they still have them. It's not like they took them apart, but if you've ever traveled somewhere and say, okay, we can go really fast on the highway, or we could take the coast road, which is very beautiful, but it's going to be really slow and long. That's what a lot of roads are. Those roads are connecting each little settlement to each other little settlement. And usually because they're along the coast is where we often will have our settlements. And then you're going bip, 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 bip. And sure, you're following the contours of the coast and you're hitting all these little towns and villages. And it's deadly slow. You don't always have the time. If time's a factor, you may look at it and say, okay, we got some big winding road that we can take. And that road will be nice and relatively safe and smooth. But it's going to take us 2 weeks. We only have 10 days or 9 days. Well, if we cut across and not take the nice smooth road, we could save ourselves. We can get there in, say, 4 days if we cut across. But we're heading into the wilds. Those are good choices. But those choices only become meaningful because time and opposition are factors. In Fellowship of the Ring, the hobbits would never have gone off-road and cut across country if they just had no reason to. They would have taken the road. I mean, they're not even outdoors people. They don't even have Strider with them yet. They don't know what the heck they're doing. But the reason why they have to make that difficult choice is because it's death on the roads, right? That they're on foot, the Nazgul are on horseback. If they stay on the road, the Nazgul are just going to run them down. It's a no-win for them. So it pushed them to say, okay, we're going to have to cut across the wilderness, and they have some adventures, and they eventually get where they're trying to get to. I mean, it was Strider, and they're like, okay, now, hey, we got the East Road, the old East Road. It's going to go right where we want to. No, the Nazgul are still riding around there, and we're trying to avoid detection and all these things, so we're going to have to cut across this nasty swamp, essentially, to get, and then over to Weathertop, and so on and so forth. So you have to make those choices. You have to give them meaning. Of course, you're going to take, if you have hours to kill, you're going to take the easiest way to go. But it's when you're in a hurry that suddenly you go, okay, I see this path is winding around, but there's a trail that kind of seems like it's cutting through the middle. Let's cut through the middle because we need to save that time. So it's kind of on you and the game and everything to make these off-road choices viable and interesting. Not necessarily that people have to take them. Not for, you don't have to be forced. I mean, even in Fellowship of the Ring, they could have taken their chances on the road and said, we're going to try to cut it so that we're traveling when we think they're not traveling, and we're going to kind of duck off the road when we hear them coming. Right? They could have made a go of it. It wasn't like it was an impossibility, but there was certainly a big risk, and there was certainly a reward if they could lose the Nazgul and make it undetected to where they were going. So you just want to make it right. You want to make it an option that is to be considered, or put something that's in the mix. Then and it's totally fine though if at a certain point. So I think oftentimes your hex crawl kind of becomes a point crawl over time until there's a new location or something set up which is either not connected on the point crawl that they've made or is a new place. And that's totally fine. So there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, we're going to take the road. We've got the time. We've got the manpower. We're going to take the road. Great. Sometimes, though, there's fun stuff off-road, and I think when your party realizes that there's stuff that they can't get to on the roads, or the roads don't make to, or needs to be found, then that gives them reasons to maybe push off-road a bit. Let's see. Brian says, just 2 available methods the party may choose to use for travel. Is there any other methods the party may need to travel by? Starlight, is that a point crawl? No, I don't think navigation's a point crawl. I would think, navigation is kind of part and parcel of a hex crawl. I think when you're on the point crawl, you tend to kind of know where you're going. Right, because one of the things with point crawls, what you're really doing is the idea of getting lost doesn't really exist. It exists. But you don't ever have to get back on track. Where the point crawl, the ones I've seen them and somebody can point me out there's something different, you never end up in a spot that you don't mean to get to. It's all about time. Point crawls is basically getting lost is about efficiency. It's not about actually ending up in a space, in a place that you don't mean to get to. You're always going to get to where you get to. Getting lost means you got there in 6 days and getting there in 3 days. I have found, though, that getting lost in the hex crawl sense, where you end up in a hex in a place that you don't intend, assuming that these hexes aren't empty, can oftentimes lead to things that end up being more engaging. And games that I've run have actually replaced the thing that they were doing in the first place, to the point where you forget where you originally were going because you're getting all this engagement and fun, and you're getting sort of invested in the stuff that you found accidentally because you got lost. And I think that element, you kind of lose that a bit with a point crawl. Of course, there are other things you gain. It's not just a totally like it's bad. It's just, you have to weigh kind of what you want. But Starlight or using using the stars to navigate, or a compass, those are all navigational things. And I think that they work either way. But just keeping in mind that when you're getting lost in a point crawl, it's every time I've seen it, it's all about travel efficiency. You don't really ever have a moment where you're lost and you have to kind of role play getting back to where are you now? It's kind of like, well, you're supposed to get there in 3 days. It took you 6. But that's not to say that there might not be point crawls that have a kind of a truly lost mechanic in it. But my understanding from what I've seen is when you're getting lost in a point crawl, it's an efficiency. It's because it's part of their efficiency game, as opposed to there's not really so much of a navigational game. Brian says, step 1 of any adventure should be make the known roads dangerous. They usually are, right? They usually are. I think there are a couple things you can do with the roads besides just danger. If the roads are, like I said, they're going to go from settlement to settlement. There are no highways. There are no freeways. And even oftentimes, I think, not that there's a big trope to have the bandits who are put the toll on the road. But I've been reading back in a lot of history that there were oftentimes a lot of tolls being done by the people who were the rightful lords of the land. They weren't about the bandits. They were about a lord who basically was stopping people. I mean, in certain eras, the lords were not much better than bandits, right? It was like the bandits kind of became the lords, kind of thing. There wasn't much separation between them. But you have that. You have to deal with local lords and things, which you may have to deal with off-road, but certainly you could probably mitigate that more off-road. If you're on the road, they're going to see you from a fair distance. You're going to be kind of stuck and having to deal with them. And if you decide to try to run off-road, I don't know that. Maybe that would be a pursuit angle or what. But, you have to deal with them. You're also going to have to deal with potential lack of secrecy. You're going to be known. You're going to be on that road, and everyone's going to know. Like, that was one of the issues with the Fellowship leaving Bree, was they were trying not to be seen and what direction they were going in. They wanted to get out without giving away the game. So that's another factor. And then again, the time factor, because old roads are not these, the Roman roads are kind of the exception to the rule, where they are doing things in a very organized way. These roads, the roads oftentimes are not very good. I think we overestimate a lot. I mean, obviously your brand of medieval fantasy, whatever, but roads are these, muddy tracks with wagon wheel ruts that just get, like, they're not even that great, and they're running from every little podunk thing. They're not cutting paths through things. They're taking the easiest way around. So hills, we're going to go around. Rivers, we'll follow the rivers. So all those things. Hey, you want something straight and efficient? It's not going to be those roads. So there are other reasons to go. And encounter-wise, the danger, relatively speaking, should be less on the roads than in the wilderness. Otherwise, people couldn't travel at all. Wilderness, by default, is pretty damn rough. So I would definitely want to tone down the danger, but they're going to be different kinds of dangers. And some of those dangers, it's very easy when you're looking at if it's just bandits on the road to just, okay, we're just going to kill some bandits and get on our way. It's a lot different if it's the lord of this particular, some estate that you're passing through, some small duchy or barony or whatever that you're in, county, knowing that if you kill them or if you do something, then it's not something that's easily going to be forgotten. This is not you're killing some outlaws, so great, they were criminals anyway. You're becoming an outlaw by doing this. So you have to deal with them in a very different way, which also can be a lot of fun. That's where a lot of adventure can come in, a lot of intrigue can come in. Well, what do you do with these local lords who are essentially holding you up for money, stiffing you, or making you do something, or whatever? That can be a lot of fun, but it's also another reason why, hey, maybe we don't want to go through there if we can kind of go around and cut through the woods, and maybe we can sneak through without taking the roads. Of course, if you're sneaking around, people are going to kind of assume you're a sneak, because nobody would be skulking around the woods unless they were skulks, right? Good folk would proudly take the king's road. So there's that element too, which again I think just adds all the flavor and fun. All right, we got some more stuff here. So Paul says, thanks for the video. You're welcome. Glad you're enjoying it. I'm interested in keeping players in the dark and not giving them a map for wilderness exploration. I'm with you. I don't mind giving them kind of a starter map, just because it can be fun to give them this map that just indicates kind of what they know, what everybody sort of knows, and then say, all right, everything else you're filling in, something very basic. Like I did in one game, which I thought was good, is basically the group's first mission in the game, the kind of thing they were set to do, which I like to give them. I think it's not a bad idea, even with a sandbox, or maybe even especially with a sandbox, to kind of give them a little starter thing, just to kind of give them the lay of land and sort of set them on good footing. And the reward for that, if they did this thing, was to get this map. They were actually escorting this cartographer around who was taking measurements. And the idea was you help this guy finish out getting this kind of region sort of mapped to some degree, and you get a copy of the map. So I like that. But I don't want the players to have some really big, or I want them to do it. And I think that's a way to engage. I think it's engaging to have the players take part in writing stuff down or drawing maps. And I think that gets overlooked. Yes, VTTs are nice, but I'm not going to get invested in a VTT map, or at least a map that I'm not doing. But I might get invested in a map that I'm keeping up myself, with all its irregularities and all its notes and things that we added, things we're realizing were wrong, all that stuff. I think it's a lot of fun as a player, and it gets overlooked too much. Michael Fraker says, there was one blog post about something called Flex Space, where your exits were results on the random events table. Once all exits were found, the party's family had learned their way through it. Yep, we read that. Actually, we've done Flex Space a couple of times, Michael Fraker. One, I think, was ages ago, and the last one actually was maybe in the last month. We looked at a few articles. If you go back to one of the community I forget what I called it, kind of roundup streams, we actually looked at it. Yep. I don't remember who wrote it off the top of my head, but yeah, that was an interesting one. You could totally do that, because basically you could look at it and say, how do you explore a hex, right? As you find enough points in it, which is kind of what the flex space thing was getting into. that if there are, say, 5 landmarks might be too big, I don't know, points of interest in this hex, one way of looking at it and say you have explored the hex when you've discovered all those points of interest. And that's kind of what it is. And since you don't really know them necessarily, or you don't know where they are, you're sort of finding them, and that's kind of rolling on the table. What do you hit first when you come in? Oh, you ended up hitting the swamp of sadness. Great. But there's also the stone of awakening, and then there's something else. Okay, now you found all those, hey, you've explored that hex. So it's a really nice way of, in a sense, quantifying mechanically how much of a hex you've explored and figured out, and saying, okay, you've explored it. And I like that, having that, like, hey, this hex is explored, because once you've done that, then you can simplify travel through the hex because the party knows the hex, number one. Number two, you can reward that with XP. That can be a way of gaining XP, is, hey, if you fully explore a hex, you get a certain amount of experience points. And because hexes might have a variable amounts of stuff in them, then the party doesn't necessarily know until you say, like, yep, you fully explored it, you've got it all, versus there's still something to find. So I think it's a nice system. And I don't think it's really unique to flex space. They're using it for different purposes. I think it's something we've seen in different systems, but it is a nice way of just quantifying. And if you want to randomize what the party is running into in a hex, you can. Obviously, there are hex crawls like Wolves Upon the Coast that don't have multiple points of interest. So then you could either add them in, or just assume that when the party's kind of dealt with or spent enough time, oftentimes it's either time, or you can do some other measure to say, yep, you've been in this hex long enough to have explored it. Let's see. Are adventurers interested in pure exploration of a wilderness? I don't think they are, and I don't think they necessarily should be. Right? I think what are you doing? You're not exploring it for exploration's sake. You can put an XP reward on it, and I think that does incentivize some amount of exploration. But why are people exploring things? Why did people set out across things? They're trying to find something. They're trying to find wealth. They're trying to find maybe a new place to live. They're trying to find a different route, right? Oh, okay, we need to cut the Europeans were looking at saying, okay, we need to try to get another way to Asia, because taking the land road, it's long and it's really expensive, and we're kind of beholden to all these people along the ancient Silk Road who take a piece of the pie every step, not to mention all the bad things that can happen. Hey, wouldn't it be great if we could we could do a roundabout all that and get to the Spice Islands without having to go through that? Man, wouldn't that be grand? And, some people are like, yeah, we're going to try to shoot around Africa and see if we can go that way. And other people are like, hey, you know what? I'm going to try to, there's this big ocean out there. I bet that, I think maybe we can whip around the other side, get around the other, right? We're all exploring for reasons. And granted, there are people who are like, I just want to go to the South Pole. That would be your kind of like, I want to discover a mythic place. I want to find the North Pole. I want to find the South Pole. You can have those. And you could even add, like I said, add some XP rewards to that stuff. Hey, there's, we think that the navel of the world where the gods first came to Earth, but nobody knows where it is. It's been lost. If you find that, you're going to get X amount of XP. That could definitely be a driver. But usually people have fairly practical reasons for doing what they're doing. So I think the party's no different. But there's all kinds of stuff out there. And this is where you're seeding your world with, and hopefully your party, it also helps if your party is proactive and has their own goals. I want to get a magic sword. I want to get a Holy Avenger sword. Where can I find a Holy Avenger sword? Okay, well, you got to find this guy's tomb. Well, where was this guy's tomb? Well, we think the last battle, blah, 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 was somewhere over here, but the exact location's been lost. Okay, now I got to find it, and then I got to get there, all this stuff. So you're building on all of that to give ultimately you have to help the party have reasons to go out there. And I think theoretically, and I think they will. I think if they know that they have that, I hate to say it, their agency to do things and ask questions and find things, then if they're invested in things, they will find reasons. And of course, you can build that into your campaigns. Oh my gosh, you're going to need the special sword of Zumzam to beat the blue dragon, so you better find out where the heck Zumzam is and what happened to his dragon killing sword, that kind of thing. Paul says it's a big expense to finance exploration. It is, but then that's just another driver. and we're going to go do this. We're going to need thousands of gold. Well, now we need thousands of gold. We're also going to need people. Well, how do we hire all these people? How do we afford all this gold? Well, we better go raid some tombs and go get some gold. I mean, I like all that stuff because all this stuff means you got to get out there. Because, yeah, you can't sit in the tavern and magically generate thousands of gold or silver to go finance your giant expedition. You're going to need to hire a boat, hire sailors, get a good captain, all that stuff, right? Then when you get there and you need all that, the logistics, and well, all that stuff costs money and you need hirelings. So what you're doing is you're pushing the party to go out and get that money. You're also pushing that party to organize themselves, and which becomes they're going to need mercs. They're going to need soldiery, probably, right? They're going to need people to wagon drivers, and they're going to need horses or mules or donkeys or whatnot, oxen, whatever. They're going to need all this stuff, and then those things need stuff. Like I remember when I ran my campaign, just for my party realizing just me throwing out and saying, okay, you guys are going out in search of all this treasure. Well, you're gonna need. What are you gonna? If you're going by yourselves, you're not gonna be able to carry that much treasure back. They're like, okay, we need a wagon. All right, who's gonna drive the wagon? Okay, I guess we need a guy to drive the wagon. All right, well, when you're in the dungeon, who's gonna be making sure the wagon and the driver are safe? Oh, we're gonna need some guards. Okay. So they already were getting this like group together, and then they come back home. I'm like, great, you got all this gold. You could see that as you're pulling in this wagon full of loot, that people are kind of side-eyeing you and licking their lips and going all squinty-eyed on you. All of a sudden they're going, wait a minute, we're going to need somewhere to pull all this loot. And we're going to need somebody to track our expenses because we want to go off on another expedition, and we know we have bills to pay here. And we're going to need somebody to watch that guy, and we're going to need somebody to watch the guy who's watching the guy, and we're going to need, and suddenly they've got a little company around them. And that's essentially your proto-domain, because then the next question is, well, where are all these guys sleeping? Are they all going home for the night? Well, that's not very secure. Can we leave all our treasure in the inn? Well, maybe in a short term, but in the long term, it's like we need a place to live. Well, now we got to make a deal with the local lord to give us a spot or rent us a spot or do whatever. Like, okay, now we're starting down that kind of landowner domain path, and that wasn't their intention. But it was just all a matter of having to deal with very practical concerns. We need organization around us so we can do what we do. We need protection. We need places. All right, so suddenly you're building this domain even though you haven't been gifted a land grant. Let's see. Michael Fraker says, so if on point crawl, then random encounters rolls won't result in a new location discovered. There's not one way of running a point crawl. You'd probably have to look at different systems. Well, I'll have to do that I probably could do that on a stream. You could look at a point crawl system, kind of break it down a bit. And then Michael Fair also says, there may be previously unimportant locations made important. Yeah, totally. I mean, you could find an empty cave. Next thing you know, somebody's in the cave. Ruins get emptied, then get repopulated. Places can definitely and should recycle. They're cleared out, then they are filled again. It sounds like company needs to support the explorers. Well, I think the explorers basically are their own company, right? That's the party. You're the party. You're kind of creating your own exploring company. I mean, you could definitely run a campaign where your party are part of or hired or work for a company. But in my case, it was just that the realities of trying to run a real kind of exploration, a concern just resulted in them building up. They didn't even call it a company, but that's kind of what it was. And land does have different values, absolutely, which is what hexes are telling you. Hexes are that way of abstracting the values of different land. And now hexes, what they don't have in them is the resources. There are different rules and systems you can use. I think Birthright has some. I know we've looked at some in different ways of trying to figure out kind of what is in the hex we're talking at the domain level if you're farming or you're looking for different raw materials, what's in there. But the land is different, absolutely has different values. All right, folks, I got a jet. It is possible I'll be back later. I'm not sure. I got stuff going on, but I wanted to get an impromptu stream. Sorry for the rocky start, but I think we got there in the end. It was a good conversation. So, folks, if I talk to you later, then I'll talk to you later. But if I don't, have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Hope I was able to answer the question, by the way. Anyhow, game on.